You know, it wouldn't be a Xenoblade game if the highest damage setup didn't involve some ridiculously cursed RNG and hyper-specific strategies that require very annoying setup and preparation, but you know, it's always really fun to see it in action and everything works out right. This time around, we have extremely strong damage over time effects that can go past the actual damage cap of the game itself, with both the shock and blaze effect, with a lot of stuff that goes into both of these that relies on everyone involved having specific setups to make it work. I find these types of setups fascinating, and I figured it might make for a somewhat interesting video to showcase and talk about, especially because the RP taken from the Nemesis with this strategy is more than twice the record for the previous game, which is absolutely absurd thanks to some of the new mechanics and options that the game has available to it. If you enjoy guide content like this on Xenoblade X, do be sure to subscribe to the channel because it does help me out so much, and I'd really love to hit that 100,000 subscriber milestone soon since I am getting very close to it and every little bit helps. Let's get into it. So the general theory behind this setup is that we can apply the shock damage over time effect with the knock and shock skill, which gives us an 18% chance of inflicting shock 3 when we use a melee art, and we can also apply the blaze skill with a soul voice after getting the sleeper status. So if you apply sleep on an enemy, you can trigger a soul voice that someone can take and apply the blaze 1 effect on the enemy. This can apply both of these damage over time effects to the enemy. Now, this damage, since it is from a melee art for both of these effects, is going to be based on the damage of the melee art that inflicted it. Now, if you know anything about previous videos that I have made or anything about this game in general with the new updates, we have a new skill in this game called Hercules Blow, which is going to be the absolute strongest possible art in the entire game for this setup. And essentially, our goal is to try to set up a situation where we can use Hercules Blow to apply both the shock and the blaze effect with a damage cap hit, or as close to damage cap as possible, so we can get the strongest possible shock and blaze effect. There's a lot that even goes into the initial conditions needed to set up for this hit. First, we need to break the chest of the yggralith 0 enemy so we can open up the weak point, which has the lowest appendage hardness possible of -4, meaning we only need one appendage crusher to hit the maximum amount of damage. We also need to apply the Ether Down 6 debuff to the yggralith 0 so we can hit the maximum amount of ether damage with Hercules Blow. And the person doing the setup is going to need to maximize their own damage with their melee attack, and also run the assault rifle so they have access to the power dive ability so they can supercharge their next art and do as much possible damage with the melee attack. They also need to be able to answer the Sandman Soul Voice so they can actually have the chance to apply the blaze effect to the yggralith 0 enemy. With enough melee attack and the proper setup for skills such as Core Crusher and with an Ether Sword like the Ultra Diamond Spatha, the person using Hercules Blow should be able to hit damage cap or near damage cap after every time they use Power Dive, meaning it should not be too terribly difficult to hit that damage cap or get very close to get the highest maximum value for Shock and Blaze. Now, normally Blaze and Shock would fall off pretty quickly, but you can actually extend the timer of these using Skells. So the really convenient thing about Skells is that you're able to equip these Time Extend debuffs. So Time Extend Blaze would extend the duration of Blaze a pretty massive amount. So simply by using a Blaze art, we can extend the Blaze effect. The good news is, this will also extend the previous Blaze effect, the strongest Blaze effect that we applied with the previous melee art. We do not have to worry about the Blaze from the Skell weapon overriding the previous, much stronger Blaze. We can just use this, extend the Blaze, and we can have it for the entire fight, as long as we have all of these Extend Blaze augments equipped, and make sure it lasts the full 8 minutes. A similar thing is done with a Shock Skell. I'm the one who had the Extend Blaze Skell, but we also want one for Extend Shock, so that can get extended as well. And then outside of that, the other two Skells will be doing something similar with the thermal resistance and electric resistance down, so we can do as much damage with Shock and Blaze as possible. This means that all 4 Skells are going to be doing something very specific to either extend thermal resistance down, extend electric resistance down, extend Shock, or extend Blaze. Which means anything else we need to do is going to have to come from something else. Which means our ground builds are going to be hyper-specific as well to make sure that we can get the most damage possible. On its own, even with a damage cap, Shock, and Blaze, it's only going to be Blaze 1 or 2, and then Shock 3, so we're not actually going to get a ton of damage out of that, but there are ways to boost the damage of Shock and Blaze a pretty massive amount, and when we can extend these for 8 minutes, it ends up adding up a very significant amount over time. So once you have your Shock and Blaze set up from a really powerful Hercules Blow, in order to increase the damage as much as possible after extending the duration, you're going to want 2 arts. One is a ray gun art called Bahamut Wave. This can raise the debuff tier of all of your currently equipped debuffs, so we can raise Blaze and Shock all the way to level 6, which will increase the damage of them quite a very significant amount. The second art you need is called Conduction Rise from the Psycho Launchers, and this is just an art that boosts the effects of Shock and Blaze by a very significant amount as well. meaning you do even more damage, and you're able to go past that display cap and do even more than the damage cap to any enemy in the game if you can get it set up. Of course, no enemy really has enough health for this to really matter outside of the Nemesis enemies, but being able to set these up can allow you to do some absolutely massive damage over time effects. Blaze ticks once every 3 seconds, and Shock ticks once every 2 seconds. So you can get a lot of damage out of this. This goes past the damage cap that your actual normal hits can do. It doesn't actually show up on leaderboards, but it does go past the damage cap, past the display cap, and you can get an absolutely massive amount of RP from doing this. The theory behind it is solid. Those are all the parts you kind of need to make it work, but in practice, actually implementing everything and getting the setup required for everything to work out is very, very difficult. Let's just go through some of the viewpoints and everything that you're going to need to make this work here. If we just start with my setup, I am actually running a potential-based build with Blossom Dance for 2 reasons. One is because I have the double potential ray guns, so I'm going to be the ray gun user who uses Bahamut Wave, so I can increase the debuff tier of the Shock and Blaze effect. And I am also using potential because I need to use Incendiary Edge on the chest of the Nemesis enemy so we can break it. We don't have a skill that can break appendages because we're all set up to do other different things in this run, so we have to have a different way of actually breaking the appendage for the chest. And the only real way to do that really efficiently is going to be Incendiary Edge. Burning Slash, the melee art, is not going to be as efficient for doing that. It is much lower ratio, and it's going to be a lot slower for actually breaking the chest, and we want to break the chest as soon as possible to make sure we can start getting those chances for Hercules Blow a lot sooner. So I'm running a potential build so I can run Incendiary Edge. It is a thermal locked art, meaning it's not affected by Core Crusher, so I can break that chest appendage, and then we can go ham on the weak point in the middle afterwards. And then, of course, my jobs outside of that are just Bahamut waving the debuffs when they finally get applied, and of course, using Blossom Dance to do as much damage as I possibly can, since I am set up for potential to do as much damage potential as I can. All in all, in the early parts of the runs, we are very careful not to accidentally steal soul voices, and also just kind of being more tame with the damage than we might otherwise be, just to kind of make sure that we're not doing anything wrong here. Since Overdrive is going to be cancelled when you get inside of your Skell to activate the Extend Blaze effect, I'm going to have to come out of the Skell and then extend or reactivate Overdrive. Since the Overdrive damage does a shockwave now, I also need to target a different appendage when I do that to make sure I don't accidentally break the weak point with the Overdrive activation. And of course, once I get out, I just kind of spam Bahamut Wave so I can get all the debuffs to level 6 to make sure we're doing as much damage as possible. So everything should be level 6 once you spam Bahamut Wave enough times, and then we're pretty much good to go from there. So I make sure that everything is applied with Bahamut Wave. End up accidentally losing Overdrive while doing that. Not really a big deal, though, because we applied the debuffs. That's the most important tick of damage that we have. So I just reactivate Overdrive one more time, and then make sure I can get targeted on the chest again once everything is set. Get back behind him again, since I have background noise equipped as one of my skills to do as much damage as possible. And then start activating Overdrive to make sure I get my Overdrive count up going. I am not the person doing Hercules Blow, and I am not the support, so I'm not as important as some of these other characters, but just having that ray gun is going to be really important to the setup here. Similarly, the other point of view I do not have is going to be another longsword user that has Howling Soul. So another damage dealer that has the sniper rifle equipped as their supporting weapon so they can apply Howling Soul to everyone. You want that Howling Soul user because that's going to boost the melee attack, the potential, and everything that is going into all of our damage to make sure we can always hit those damage caps with Hercules Blow and to do even more damage with our Blossom Dances and our other damaging attacks. So one of your melee longsword users needs to be on that sniper rifle as well for the Howling Soul buff. I already kind of talked about what the Hercules Blow user is going to be mainly doing here. My friend Lawrence here, I believe, also had the Extend Shock Skell, so if whenever Shock was actually applied with Hercules Blow, he would get into his Skell and just kind of extend that Shock. And basically the main thing you're going to be doing here is building up your Overdrive count, obviously, and getting to that maximum Overdrive count. And then, of course, after that, you will be using Offensive Stance, Power Dive, and then being prepared to use Hercules Blow when you have the Soul Voice ready. So once you get that Soul Voice for the Sleeper effect, you're going to be using a Hercules Blow to try to trigger the damage over time effect from both Shock and Blaze. The Blaze is much more guaranteed than the Shock, but we'll talk about that a bit later. But regardless, once that effect is actually triggered, once you get that damage over time effect, you extend that Shock, get back out of your Skell, and then you're good to go from there. And then after that, you're basically just going to be doing damage with your melee arts, Hercules Blow, True Stream Edge, Tornado Blade, and just kind of doing as much damage as possible the rest of the run once everything is set up properly. This is probably one of the easier roles to do. It's not really the most complicated setup. You just have to make sure that you can actually get those damage caps off. Make sure you're extending that Shock once you do that, and assuming you're running the Shock Skell. And then after that, just kind of get back out on the ground and then get ready to go. Now, let me show you the support POV. This is absolutely the hardest job that anyone has here. You have to topple lock with Starlight Kick, which is already ridiculous. You have to have Overdrive, gain TP, and Grand Procession, so you can feed TP to the entire party, so you'll be spamming Overdrive a lot just to make sure you can do that. You have to be able to use the cycle launchers to apply the conduction rise effect, which is why you have to run that instead of a much better toppling weapon. Starlight Kick is one of the worst weapons you can have to actually topple lock, but you know, we kind of didn't have a choice here. You have to have the knife, which means you're going to be able, the one applying Black Butterfly for the Easter resistance down 6. So you're going to have that available to you. I believe Void was also running a bunch of extend ether downs on his melee weapon to make sure that that could apply more often and stay longer once he actually got the ether resistance down 6. He also has to use energy source to feed me potential, so I do more damage with Blossom Dance. He also has to have the sleeper effect from the knife, the screamer, so we can put Yggralith to sleep and trigger that soul voice so Lawrence can answer it with howling, or with Hercules blow. And all around, Void had a very, very difficult job here of just kind of keeping everything up to do as much damage, so everyone else can do as much damage as possible. I believe he is also running the extend thermal down scale, so once we get the damage over time effects, he runs back to a scale. Unfortunately, gets cockpet mode, which kind of means that Yggralith Zero is able to use Dark Ray, but that's not really a huge deal. We just kind of have to wait that out before we can topple again. And you can hear me spamming Bahamut Wave in the background here as well. So, like I said, Void has a very, very hard job, very, very hyper-specific setup to make everything work, and I think he did an absolutely fantastic job. Make sure you keep Conduction Rise applied once you get the damage over time effects actually off, and you should be pretty much good to go from there. Now, as you'll look kind of at the top here, once Void kind of changes his camera, you should see both damage over time effects ticking for over the damage cap once again, which means everything is kind of going well, and now we just need to keep him topple locked as much as we can. The Sniper Rifle can help with topple locking because Sniper Rifle does have a stun art, so you can kind of stun on top of the topple there, which can be really nice to kind of increase effectiveness and just kind of increase the reliability of this build. So we have one support, we have 3 longsword users. One of the longsword users is the potential user, which is going to be me, in this case, since I have the double potential ray guns, which no one else had. And outside of that, the other 2 are using melee builds, and one melee is for Howling Soul, and one has the assault rifle for power dive, so they can hit the damage cap on Hercules Blow and apply that shock effect. So there is a lot that goes into this. The support has to keep the ether resistance down, has to keep conduction rise up, has to keep the nemesis toppled, has to feed me energy source for potential, and has to apply the sleeper voice. There's so much that goes into all of this. It is ridiculous. But I think, like I said, Void did an absolutely fantastic job with this. Once everything actually gets set up, it's a lot more smooth sailing from there. It's just kind of just doing as much damage as possible at that point and just kind of letting the shock and the blaze tick to do their thing. Those are going to be the main sources of damage for the actual Nemesis build. Your actual damage you're doing does not matter as much. Obviously, it still matters, but it does not matter as much as all of the damage over time ticking from the shock and the blaze. That it's just going to be an absolute massive amount there. So my specific setup here is to optimize, use Blossom Dance as much as I possibly can while not sacrificing potential as much as I can help it. I am running 2 aura rapid cooldowns because I do have to, but I am kind of trying to do as much damage as I can with Blossom Dance here, which is why I'm just kind of spamming it off cooldown as much as I can. Now, I also have to make sure I keep activating offensive stance every minute or so, just to make sure I don't run out of that, since I do need to take advantage of the aura rapid cooldown. I do have Supreme Sword as well. I got potential boost, background noise, Core Crusher, obviously. That's going to be really important to make sure we don't break the core, to do as much damage as we can to the core. And all around, this is just kind of the setup and how everything works. Now, the reason this ends up being extremely cursed is knock and shocks. 18% chance. I don't even know if it's as high as 18% chance, but applying the shock at all is very, very difficult. Much more difficult than it seems like in this video here. Actually getting that shock off is very RNG and can be very, very annoying. It feels like less than 18% a lot of times. So we had a lot of runs where we were just trying to get it for multiple minutes and it just didn't work, so we just had to reset, try to get it again. The blaze is very consistent. All you need is that sleeper soul voice, but the shock is very, very inconsistent, which is very, very annoying. And like I said, you need very hyper-specific setups to make it work. We are very fortunate we were able to get shocked very early on in this run, so we were able to kind of just keep going and get a pretty sizable increase to the previous RP record. We got almost 80,000. I believe it was 79,700 or something, which is really, really insane. Obviously, there's definitely room for optimizing further. We can definitely get even better equipment if we really need to. We can definitely set up the shock and blaze even earlier if we were really optimized and doing really well. But for now, I think this was pretty decent and did pretty well overall. I did have to use Bahamut Wave there to make sure we get Ether down 6, since Black Butterfly was only applying Ether down 5, so I did end up doing that again to make sure that we could continue doing as much damage as possible to the core here. So this is a very complex setup, and it's also very, very RNG and very cursed, and it can be really annoying actually trying to get that setup going. But if you can actually get everything going, everything working right, well, you can see the results here. Xenoblade X is a really customizable, really broken game where really funny things can happen. And in that top left corner there, you should just see that damage cap ticking for as much as possible, and the Yggralith RP just going down a massive amount. Very quick note on Telethia. You cannot apply the blaze effect on Telethia because it's immune to sleep. So you cannot apply a blaze with the melee art, unfortunately. You can only apply shock, but that actually makes everything significantly easier because you're able to kind of modify your setups based on that, and you do not have to have nearly as cursed setups, and you can focus entirely on just trying to get the shock damage. You can also use an ether resistance downscale instead, which is going to be a lot more consistent than trying to use Black Butterfly, and all around it does end up being a bit more consistent, even though shock is still very, very annoying to try to apply. But on the yggralith, you can get both these damage caps ticking, and it is really, really satisfying and really, really cool to do so when you can actually get it going here. It is also worth mentioning that RP seems to have been increased a pretty massive amount, an almost overkill amount, just kind of making it much less urgency for a lot of people to try to go ham and on the RP of the Nemesis to try to get their rewards. And I think that'll probably be adjusted again in the future to probably be less than the 24 million that we end up having now, because, yeah, I don't think a lot of people are going to be trying to get the specific setup and just trying to do the super RNG setup here to get the really high amounts of RP from the Nemesis here. But, you know, they could, and if they do, maybe they'll bring back the higher RP of the Nemesis, but I think for now this is probably pretty good. 79,732 is a really, really nice RP score here. Regardless, I think that is probably going to cover it for the main topics of the video here. I do hope you have learned something, maybe learned more about the Xenoblade X combat system and the absolutely crazy things you can do with it from watching this video. And if you did, please do be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends that might want to see how to do really cool Nemesis runs. Maybe you can try this for yourself. It is very cursed, like I said, but it is really cool to pull off. You can actually get the setup going for it. Please do also look forward to all of my future guides on this game. I still have more things planned on the game, a few more weapon guides to go. I have a character tier list to make, all the AI party members that you normally would never use. I'll be making a tier list on them. And I have some more general types of videos planned as well. So please look forward to all of that in the future. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful and blessed day. And hopefully I will see you back here soon.